Hey everybody, thank you for joining and welcome to our next session of the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. You are in the Power Up Your Resume with Power Query session, and I am Venice Thacker, and I'm going to be leading us this evening. So before we get into it, we have a couple reminders that you should definitely mark your calendar for the SharePoint and Power Platform and Microsoft Teams conference coming up next year in Las Vegas in 2021. I know we're all going to be itching to go out and experience Las Vegas in all its glory and be back together. So please mark your calendars for that happening next year. Also, thank you to all of our awesome, generous sponsors. This could not happen without you guys. So thank you for all of your support. Make sure to visit these guys' vendor booths and sessions, virtual sessions tomorrow. I know that I am joining Proficient's 2 vendor sessions tomorrow, both at noon Pacific and 3 Pacific. So we're having some fun interactive sessions there. So I hope you guys take the opportunity to interact with these vendors who are participating. Next off, a little bit more about me. I am located in Atlanta, Georgia. I was born and raised here, went to college here. I'm a huge Georgia Bulldogs fan, and I've settled here in Chamblee, Georgia. So if you're familiar, that's where I'm coming out of for tonight's session. Right now, I'm working as a business consultant at Proficient, and I work within the Microsoft BU. So I am doing a lot of work with SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, and Power Platform. I've seen some people switch out their photo, but I loved the fun astronaut, so that's who I am tonight. But it's great to meet you guys. I'm super excited that you've decided to join us. And I'd love to connect. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with how this experience was and what you guys took away from it. A reminder here, please enter the raffle. This is a crazy giveaway to win this VR set. So if you visit the booth, you're able to enter into the raffle, which is this link. You fill out a form, and then if you have the correct answers, you are entered to win. So a fun opportunity there. So make sure you participate in that. And last, we are also supporting a couple different charities with this event, which is super cool. All of the vendors, 10% of their donations went to these, and we're hoping to make an even bigger impact with all of you attending. And anything that you're able to give to support our medical organizations fighting COVID, please do. It is going to make a difference. Okay, now for our agenda. We are talking about Power Query. This is really targeted at an audience that has never worked with Power Query. So it's an introduction to what is Power Query, where does that fall within the Microsoft suite. We're going to do a intro example to Power Query. So we'll step away from the slides and we'll get into Excel. And I'll show you a difference of what it looked like to interact with Power Query through the UI, showing you the clicks. We're going to do a very, very basic example through that, and then also comparing that to if you're trying to accomplish the same goal using Excel formulas. And then I'm going to share with you my real life example of honestly why I love Power Query so much. Like what happened, what was our problem that we were trying to solve with my client. We were in a major crunch and really Power Query saved the day for us. And so I'm really excited to share with you guys that real example and show the big capabilities of now that you've seen what it can do on a small scale and you're familiar with it, what does that look like when you're really using those capabilities to the fullest. And then if we have time, I'd love to answer some questions. So feel free to, throughout the session, put those in the Q&A. Okay, what can Power Query do? So like I said, this is aimed at someone who's never heard of Power Query. And what Power Query is, it is a add-in in Excel. It is used in multiple different Microsoft products, though, which we'll talk about. But it is functionality that is a UI that you can interface with when working with data. So Power Query first lets you find and connect with different data sources. The list of sources that you can connect with Power Query is quite remarkable. So you can do regular text and CSVs. Of course, you can do a table and a range either within the workbook that you're working with or outside of it. You can connect to a database, you can connect to Azure, you can connect to Exchange. It continues to grow though, so you can connect to a SharePoint list. You can pull in data from a SharePoint list through Power Query. You can connect to Dynamics. You can connect to Facebook. You can connect to Active Directory, Salesforce, and more third-party tools. I messed around with the Facebook one a little bit and I wanted to use that as an example, but I don't use Facebook nearly enough to make that a cool marketing example, but there is definitely potential there of the different third-party tools that you can pull in really easily and transform your data. So you can connect, pull in data. You can do more than one file, so it's not just one table. It doesn't have to be all in the same place. We're going to share this in the example that I show you for the big Kahuna, the client example. That's going to be using multiple files. And then once you have this data, you can merge, you can shape it. Power Query is not the only one to have this capability, but it is a really intuitive, easy tool to use to be able to merge and shape your data. So that's a main purpose. You know, you're able to shape it how your business needs. You're able to cleanse the data according to your needs, and then you're able to create custom views over the data. So those last three are not revolutionary. Those you can accomplish in many different ways, but there are things that Power Query makes a lot easier for you to do when trying to accomplish those three things. So that's what we're talking about here. Power Query, that's what it can do. Why do I love it? Because I'm a nerd. No, I love it because it's accessible. So it's built into Excel as of 2016. So you may already have it and you don't know it's there. And it's in the data tab. Go check it out. But previous to the 2016 version, you could go and add it in. That's a really easy Google search if you are using a version of Excel earlier than 2016. So going in, downloading that, adding it in, and then you have it in Excel. Super easy, very accessible. Everybody has Excel. It's approachable. It's not a tool that you need to take any classes to learn or know a lot of lingo or anything like that, right? It's click to configure UI, and it makes things that might have been more difficult if you were to do just in Excel, if you were going to do a formula or maybe a macro, things like that. It makes it a lot more simple and intuitive because it has the front of the UI that you can transform your data. You can easily undo something, and you can edit any steps you make at any point. So as it builds on itself, you've made a couple changes and you say, wait, no, you can go back and edit any steps that you add. We'll talk more about that. I also love it because it's easily refreshable. So when you're using Power Query, you're never going to have to rebuild something that you've built before, right? So it is recording all of the steps that you're doing when you're transforming your data and writing M code behind that for you so that you have a query that you can edit or you can refresh in live time. You can refresh it at any point, and it really is a very, very easy way to have fresh data. But why can you add this to your resume more so than just Excel? This part I'm really excited about too, so much so that it's in the title, right? Why can you add this to your resume? It's natively integrated into multiple different Microsoft products. So the one that we're going to focus on most is Excel. Those are where my examples are. That's where I've really bonded with Power Query. But the same interface is in Power BI. So if you know Excel and you know Power Query and you interact with Power Query and you feel comfortable, it would be such an easy transition to hop over to Power BI and start interacting with building queries there. You've already used the tool. It's the same UI and design. It's also in Microsoft SQL Server data tools for Visual Studio, so you can carry that over, and really it's so much easier of an entrance to using that tool when you have already used Power Query in Excel or Power BI. And then it's the same as Common Data Service. So they've integrated Power Query into all 4 of these products. I don't think it's going to stop here. There is so much potential with Power Query and Power BI and Common Data Service platform to grow into the whole Power Platform that I think investing time into really knowing and mastering Power Query is going to continue to serve you down the road when using and working with Microsoft products. So that's why I think this is such a value add to learning Power Query. It's not just the product's great and it's going to save you time, but I think it's going to really serve you down the road with Microsoft and the Power Platform. Okay, the intro. I'm going to hop out of my PowerPoint and I'm going to pull up 2 Excel files. So these 2 Excel files are going to be our 2 basic examples. The premise of this example is you run an ice cream store and you have product ID in both of these exports that you've received, but you're being asked to map the product category to what the quantity is of each of these product IDs. So there's definitely more than one way to do this, right? There's a multitude of ways to do this. First off, we're going to show you how to do it just with VLOOKUP so that we can compare doing the same action in a integral Excel way of using a formula versus doing it within Power Query. That being said, if you were just tasked with this once, I think you should just do the formula, right? But we're using this as an example to get comfortable, know where Power Query is, and then really show the full capabilities. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we want to populate product category here. We need to move this over because VLOOKUP requires that it's looking up the far left column. Then you can go over here, you type in you want a VLOOKUP, you're looking up the product ID, You're looking it up in this table. You're looking up column 2, and you want an exact match. Froyo, great. That is right. We can see very simply that that is the correct product category, and we can populate that down, and we're done. That is what it looks like to do these steps through Excel. Now we're going to do it in Power Query. So where we would go is we go up to Data. Now we're looking at Power Query right here, Get and Transform. So what I want to do first is I need to import the data into Power Query. So we're going to get from a table, or excuse me, get from a CSV. We're going to go to ice cream because we run an ice cream business, and we're going to import category. So this is Power Query creating that connection to that file. So we now have a query of this file. What that means is if the file grows or changes, we can refresh it and that relationship is there and it'll pull it in. So this looks right. That was the same product category table we knew. We're going to load that. And you can see that the query is coming up here, and now we have a category query. So we do need to do the same thing for quantity sold. We need to create that relationship. That looks good. We'll load that in. Okay, so now we have our two queries, our two sources. And what we want to do is we want to add category onto the end here, right? So what you would do with Power Query is you would merge. We just right-clicked on quantity sold, and we want to merge the two. So these are the common IDs, and we want a full join. So this is the Power Query editor. This is the view that is consistent, and this is the UI really that you're interacting with. That's going to help us build this M code that has such advanced capabilities really in a very approachable way. So what we would need to do is we need to expand this. We want to keep Power Query. This is showing, here, let me cancel this for a second. This is importing the table and applying it to these different rows. So we want Power Query, or excuse me, we want product category here, and it's simple as that. We close and load. So by doing that, we created 3 queries, right? But these first 2 are creating that connection to the files, and the third one is creating the refresh. So at the beginning of this, I mentioned if we were only doing this once, I would choose to just do a VLOOKUP. But if you're being tasked with this, you get this export every month per se. And there's a couple different steps that you need to do to transform it, like moving columns to the VLOOKUP, and you have to do that every time. All you have to do once you've set this up once is hit refresh. So I'm going to go back to our category workbook for an example. So let's say your company decides to go all in on Froyo, right, next month. And so you have new data here that everything's different. This is Froyo, and now you need to generate the same report. You can go in here, go back to our final destination here, and you can go refresh all, and your work is done. You would just put the files in the same place, and it refreshes and has all of your steps there. So that refresh all is so important, so helpful. and one of my favorite parts. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, so that was the intro. That was a basic comparison of what the steps look like. You can accomplish things pretty similarly. There's not a ton that you couldn't do in Excel that you can do in Power Query, but it's the workload that it takes off when you are going to be working with large amounts of data, or you're going to be doing a task multiple times, or if your data is updating constantly and you want real-time data, that's really where Power Query becomes a huge asset. So like I was saying, there was those two different approaches there. I've listed the different steps that I took. Power Query seemed like it might have taken a little bit longer because there was that setup. It feels like a little bit of management up front, but you saw how easy it was to refresh when, if that was new data, that would have needed to be, you would have to do all 4 steps again. So that's really where the Power Query value comes from. Okay, now for our example, or client example, I mean. So we were tasked with needing to make a business decision. Some of the context here is this was a SharePoint migration. Some of you may have experience with those. And we were inventorying what was on the old SharePoint sites that we needed to account for when moving it to the new SharePoint sites. The scope of this was huge. There were 4,000 site collections being considered. So hundreds of thousands of users using these site collections. The scope was huge. There were so many end user actors here. What our business problem was we needed to assess if we should buy or build, or how we needed to handle things that wouldn't migrate based on the user's perceived criticality of them. So if you've gone through a SharePoint migration before, even just moved a house, right? You need to consider, do I get rid of this, or do I move it? Do I need to rebuild it? Do I need to find a replacement? We were gathering data in order to make those decisions. So that was really our problem of needing to gather data, needing to have the most up-to-date data we could to make the best decision possible. So that's the perfect scenario for Power Query, in my opinion. So what did we do? We were able to create different Excel files to host different site collections, so a different unit of that unsupported data, really just the answers that we needed from users. So on the left, I have a screenshot of a document library. This was my data source. This was what I needed to collect data from all of these workbooks, and I needed it to be as up to date as possible. I needed my reporting to be real time. The image on the right is what is inside of these different workbooks. So within each workbook, we had different tabs. And on these different tabs, this is an example of a tab. We had each row item was a different thing that wouldn't move. Now, these workbooks were sent to hundreds of people, and there were hundreds of workbooks. So there was no way to just talk to somebody and know when they updated it and say, oh, okay, yeah, I'll go check your answers now. So there was hundreds of different people filling in this business criticality row or column. So this is how our data was set up. We did this because these workbooks were going to different people. Some people never respond to the workbooks. I'm not sharing a demo of this solution. Quick note that I forgot to mention, because I didn't want to reproduce it, and I didn't want to do a dummy version of it, because I think it's a great example of how robust a solution Power Query can be. But so I've taken screenshots of it to share with you and to share this example with you, but I have redacted details of it so that I keep this client confidential. So that's why list URL is blank. But this was our setup, and this is the situation that the data was in. So this is a screenshot of Power Query. We were able to import this whole folder. So everything, all of the Excel workbooks in a folder, you can pull that into Power Query. So we are able to look at each Excel workbook. That's each line item here is a different workbook. And then we're able to import that by adding this column, which is just super cool. I didn't know you can do this until now. I followed a very awesome blog that I can share after this of step-by-step how to do this and how they taught me. And really, I think that's a testament of anything you want to do, probably in Power Query, probably in Excel, somebody has already met this challenge a lot of the time. So that's how I learned how to do this specific formula of how you can import a workbook, break it open, and then have the columns of data and manipulate that as you want it. So let that be a testament to all of those people writing blogs on the internet. Thank you, guys. You're saving our butts. But we were able to open up each of these workbooks, import them, and expand them. Another cool thing about doing it this way, for you to consider if you ever run across this, is, and I alluded to this in the example, but if you are using a source like that, if you point Power Query at just a folder instead of having that data building the analysis on top or with the data, like if you were to build the formulas in the data that you bring in, you're not able to bring that across, right? But this way, the query was separate than the data, and we were able to update the data as we needed. So we could remove a workbook from this folder or from the document library, and then it's just not considered, and Power Query automatically updates that. So consider your source when you're setting up a solution in Power Query for this. Next, we expanded the data. This is a screenshot of how it shows you after we did that. These are all of the column names. So you really have a very intuitive UI interface to seeing what kind of data you have. We pulled in all of the columns that we had because data was inconsistent. I'm sure you guys have found that before when working with data. It's not always clean, and you're probably going to have to do some cleanup. So I found it really easy to work with Power Query in that way of you had a visual of what was there, and then you were able to reduce that down and filter out what you needed and what you were looking for. And just like I was mentioning earlier, we definitely had to clean the data here. Probably every project or initiative that you're working on, you would need to do that. So we encountered things like rows 18 and 19 here, where I thought we could use this column item to identify across the board, but as always, that's not the case, right? So you have to clean that up. So we were really able to pull that out really easily. I could continue cleaning up the data that was clean and worked for me. And then you can work with that data on the side by pulling out just the rows that had missing items names. And so I found Power Query to be really easy to work with when cleaning the data. And this is another example of how we were able to support this solution in Power Query. I mentioned before that we had hundreds of different people responding to their surveys that were in a workbook. So we didn't have a drop down that said 0 to 3. So people just responded whatever they want. And people said 4 when the max was 3. People put the number and words or just the words or just the number. So if we didn't have this built in a query that could be automated and force those into the numbers that we were reporting on and looking at, this would have been insane. So Power Query really made this easy to say, we're going to have a merged column from everyone's values, and we can account for all of the different crazy things that people, different variations that people were giving us, and we can report on that merged value. So we're able to just build this conditional column and then build these values in with it. And then once it's in there once, it works every time. Then last but not least, we're able to get all of our data all together into one workbook view, which was really the main goal, right? So we had different types of data in different workbooks, but with Power Query, we were able to merge that all together, being able to look at the whole thing and really create what type of views that we wanted of that data. So I have a GIF here showing how easy it was to refresh if something had changed. So say, we sent out a communication reminding people that we need their answers. The next day we refresh and we have the most up-to-date data that is possible. It is real time. So that was a huge value add that really let the business feel confident when making their decision of how to move forward, that they were able to know that we're making the decision based off of right now. Okay, so that was an overview of the solution that I have built on Power Query. Because of that, that is why I am here today advocating for Power Query. It really convinced me that that was such a value add, and I don't know how we would have done it differently unless we scripted the whole thing, which is possible, but there wasn't a need when there was really an intuitive, interactive way for a business end user like myself to do that. And so that I had the data in my hands too, and I was able to get at what I need and updated it exactly when I wanted it. What I'm sharing now is a table that Microsoft shares on their Microsoft Docs about the challenges that Power Query meets. And 4 out of the 5 we've talked about today. I think it was really incredible that my first experience with Power Query was showcasing the different value adds and that they say Power Query is addressing. So today we talked about allowing connection to a wide range of data sources. We talked about all the different types of data sources you can connect to and how that can mean multiple data sources at one time. We talked about the intuitive experience. I showed you how easy it was to just click to merge and interact with that way. I showed you how we were able to build one intuitive conditional column to take all of the various answers that we were getting from end users and merge that into the data that we wanted, cleaning that up one time in an intuitive way, and it was done then. I showed you how Power Query made it repeatable for us, and so really a challenge is how I can't imagine trying to clean up the data the amount of times that we wanted to refresh it, right? So Power Query made the setup just happen one time, and we were able to refresh as many times as needed. I mentioned how we were able to work on a subset of data. We talked about that today. We had to clean up different data sets in different ways. The data was that messy. And so Power Query allows you to do that and really drill down on what you're looking for. And then I don't have an example of consistency across platforms. I'm giving that to you as an action item to go try that out in Excel and Power BI and the 4 different products that we talked about. So I hope you guys try that out. But those are the different challenges that Microsoft is addressing with Power Query. My only cons, just being honest here, there are a couple cons of Power Query. I know you are shocked that I do have them, but here they are. It can be really slow. The solution that I showed you, we probably had 10 different queries, and the queries had 20 different steps, and it would take a while for it to load sometimes. So there's a cap of where Power Query makes sense, and when at least with Excel, where Excel and Power Query make sense, and where you may need to consider moving this to a database, depending on how much data you have. So I experienced that con. I was still into it, but that is a factor that you need to consider. Another con is you can't do everything that you may possibly want through the UI that they have. There's some things of, if you want really complex conditional columns with a lot of different logic, you may not be able to do that through the UI building that I showed you with how we merged the fields in. But that being said, on top of the UI that you see, Power Query is writing M code for you behind the scenes. And so you do have the option at any time to open up the advanced editor in Power Query. We didn't have a chance to do that today. Please go check that out. It is super cool to see how every action that you've taken, every step of the query that you've written, you are able to see the code behind it. And you're able to edit that code. So you can't do everything through the UI that you may want to do, but you can get it close, and then you're able to edit that in the code. So that might not appeal to everyone, depending on your comfort zone with that, but that's a huge asset. I know a lot of colleagues that really utilize the advanced editor. Some people feel more comfortable there. So Power Query offers that flexibility. And those are my only 2 cons. And I turned one into a pro. So I hope you guys learned something from Power Query. I hope that you guys go check it out. I think it's a really cool tool. I've found a lot of value with it, and I hope you will too. So please let me know if you guys do try out Power Query. I would love to see how you guys are using it. So please connect with me on LinkedIn if you try it out and find success. But thank you for joining. I'll check and look to see if there's any questions in the QA. But before I do, please provide feedback. This is such an awesome event. I can't believe that it is this huge. And the technical behind the technical setup behind this is really awesome. So I know we would love to hear about how your experience is. So please give event feedback. What is it like? I know I've joined a few sessions as a user, and that's been really cool. But of course, Teams live events are pretty new. So there are going to be some learning experiences there, but let us know your event feedback. How's it going? And please, please, please give me speaker feedback too. I would love to hear it. Anything and everything there. Alrighty. Check in if there's any Q&A. Do you have any separate tool for Power Query? I don't believe there's any standalone tool for Power Query. No, but the data source can be standalone, and then you're able to view that in Excel. So Excel seems to be the comfort zone for a lot of people with data. So depending on what source you had in mind there, I would say if it's needing to be standalone, have the data source standalone, and then you can import that and transform it in the Power Query on top of Excel. Okay, and that's the only question I see so far. I'll be hanging out here for a few more minutes.